Welcome to the Ascents at Boston Avenue podcast. My name is Philip Boone, and I use he, him, his pronouns.
And I'm Caitlin Drake. I use female pronouns she, her, hers.
Before we begin, I'd like to state that the views represented in this podcast are those of the individuals in this conversation and not the official position of Boston Avenue United Methodist Church. At the end of this month, our church will be undergoing some pastoral transitions as 3 of our associate ministers leave, and we greet 2 new associate ministers. In some churches and denominations, such changes would be unheard of. But for United Methodists, this type of change is actually built in and kind of expected. We wanted to explore this part of our denominational heritage and place our present experience in a broader context. Joining us today to discuss this are our guests, Reverends Jen Logsdon Kellogg and Sara Pugh Montgomery. Hello, everybody.
Hi,
Good morning.
Lynn. This is Reverend Jen. I use she, her pronouns.
And this is Reverend Sara Pugh Montgomery. I also use she, her, hers.
In this conversation, a term that we're going to use a lot and a term that emerges when we're talking about these pastoral transitions in the United Methodist Church is itinerancy. So would one of you explain what that is?
Well, generally, itinerancy means that we are willing to go where we are sent. And so United Methodist pastors, this is the way it was explained to me in seminary. My United Methodist history professor said that in order to be a good Methodist pastor, you really have to have itchy feet. And so you have a desire and a willingness to travel and to go wherever the need is for pastoral presence.
Who in the United Methodist Church does itinerancy apply to?
Well, this is Reverend Sara. It mainly, as Jen was just saying, mainly applies to the pastors, and if the pastors have families, to their families as well, because we don't itinerate solo if we also have families with us. And that whole idea around the pastor itinerating is also about knowing that the church is truly about the lay people. So you have the strength of the lay people that stay. And so the pastor itinerates and moves around. So that way, a church or a congregation can be able to be gifted with a new pastor that has a different set of strengths in their new period of time. So if you think about sort of a lot of lay people staying in one spot for a long time as a church community, they're also going through growth and adaptation and changes. And so infusing that with different strengths, with different graces, with different gifts, every so often really is a huge bonus. I'm grateful for the way we do itinerancy now. When I was in my former church in Virginia, some of my retired clergy friends told me that they used to show up to annual conference every year with their U-Haul packed because they didn't know until annual conference if they were going to a new spot or not. So now is a much healthier process, in my opinion, and I'm very grateful for it.
So we'll talk about our current process in a little bit, but where does itinerancy come from? Because not every denomination does it. What is its history? Why do we have it? Drawing on those Methodist history classes from seminary.
This is Reverend Jen, and really from the beginning of the Wesleyan tradition, the goal for pastors was to reach people who were otherwise unreached. And so especially in the beginning of the Methodist tradition in the United States, the tradition was to have circuit riding pastors who would have a really wide territory and would be appointed to a pretty large area to go and travel around and to visit churches that were forming and churches that had been formed. Again, very much the lay people took care of managing the church, and the itinerant pastor would ride around and preach and baptize and provide the sacraments. And the goal really then was to establish a congregation, very much like in the book of Acts, where Paul and Barnabas were apostles who were sent out and would spend a little bit of time with a community and get a church established and get leadership in place and then move on. Same idea for us.
Who decides what church you serve?
Oh, that's a great question. The short answer is it's a discernment process, and that it's decided with the staff parish relations committee with the current pastor, with the district superintendent, and with the bishop. So kind of everybody is in on that together, sort of discerning, is this time for me to leave or time for me to, is it still good for me to stay? And so every year we're actually up for reappointment. So most folks don't know that every year we could be moved. And that has happened to some folks, that they are actually moved a little bit more frequently. So that part of about who decides then really is looking at that, again, that congregational model. It's not just up to the pastor and it's not just up to the DS, but sometimes the DS calls and says, hey, I need you over here. Now, when that call happens, in my mind's eye, here's what I think happens. Because so these group of DSs meet with the bishop and they start meeting in January and figure out where people are going to go and what churches need new clergy, and they figure out the gifts of the clergy and all this stuff. I imagine it like Selection Sunday for March Madness. Now, I'm sure it has nothing to do like that, but that's sort of how I just imagine it to be. You know, like they have each one of us like on a little line, and then they just keep on moving us around. And it's, you know, like you have the different, are you going to be in the East or the West or the,
do you think they also give you seeds? So like, this is
Yes.
a 1 seed, and
because the seeds are based on our salaries, because you also you usually have to move around based on your salary. So usually like my salary level isn't going to jump all the way up to being the top honcho at a large church, because that's too many rungs for me to jump up in terms of salaries, because there's other people that are in those salary levels. So I'm probably like an 8 seed or something, you know, and so they're kind of, so again, I'm sure this is not how this actually goes, but this is how I create it within my mind. Now, David did serve as a DS, and so he could probably tell us more, but I think that they're all like marred to secrecy in terms of how that process actually looks and works. I don't know, Jen, do you know any more about the actual process?
Well, yeah, that's interesting, because early on in my ministry, I was at a session with Bishop Hayes, and he described the appointment process. And it was pretty much just like what you said, except
like March Madness,
right? But with a lot of prayer behind it. So, you know, he was saying it was all grounded in prayer, but basically they do an inventory of all of the churches and the needs of the churches and the pastors and the gifts of the pastors, and kind of look at, you know, how long have certain pastors been in their churches. There's not a set time frame. It used to be that there was a kind of a set time, 2 or 3 years, that they expected pastors to stay in one church. I heard Bishop Hayes say that his ideal appointment was 7 years. And so they were trying to lengthen the amount of time that a pastor would stay. But it depends on where the needs are and where the giftedness of the pastors are. But yeah, pretty much just like March Madness.
Jen, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of prayer behind Selection Sunday as well.
I agree. I was just going to say that.
To kind of piggyback off of that, I was wondering, because you have so many churches with so many theological thought processes and have different theologies than each other, do they try to put a progressive pastor with a progressive church? Do they keep that in mind when they make their decisions?
Now they do. It didn't used to be that way, but the last round of appointments, they have asked us in our paperwork, you know, what is our theological stance or leaning, especially as it applies to LGBTQ, but more broadly also, and they are trying to make matches. Now, this is an issue for debate. I think that could go against the reason, ideally, for itinerancy was to, in some ways, encourage churches to have pastors that they wouldn't otherwise choose for themselves. So this was especially a big deal for female pastors early on, when female pastors were first ordained. For majority white churches, being asked to have a pastor who's a person of color. That has been a strength of our connectional system and our way of doing appointments of clergy. And so the question now is, are we kind of weakening that? But because the theological divide is so great right now, because of the dissent within the United Methodist Church, they've decided that it's just not a good time to put a mismatched pastor to a church. And I agree with that. I want to say one thing about who is subject to itinerancy we forgot to cover. So Sara and I are both ordained elders. And there are also ordained pastors who are deacons. Deacons do not submit to itinerancy. They choose where they want to serve. And also there are licensed local pastors who are able to stay in their own communities and also are not asked, they may be asked to itinerate, but they are not committed to. So it's really the ordained elders and those who are seeking ordination as elders who are itinerant.
And so obviously, for this particular faith community, Reverend Eva Marie Campbell is an ordained deacon. And so she is not itinerant.
Jen, you said something about committed to itinerancy. Can you talk more about what that committed means? Like where do you commit? Do you pledge your firstborn or
When we are ordained as United Methodist elders, well, and deacons do this as well, but when we are ordained as United Methodist pastors, we enter into a covenant relationship with the other clergy in our conference. So this is a little bit different situation for me and Sara because we are members of different conferences, but I was ordained in the Oklahoma United Methodist Conference. And so as a part of my ordination process, I was asked several times to really think about and pray about and consult with my family about whether it would be right for me to be able to say, I am willing and able to serve any church within the bounds of the United Methodist Conference in Oklahoma. So that's the commitment I've made. And it is a covenant relationship with the other clergy who are members of my conference.
Another term that is used in this conversation is appointment. What is the difference between itinerancy and appointment?
So, just as we've been talking, itinerancy sort of looks at that bigger overall picture of what we are committing to overall within our ministry. Appointment is the actual place that we will go to serve that time frame. So itinerancy is kind of that overall movement that we are committing to. And then the appointment is where we are going to serve. So, Jen, myself, Amy, Eva Marie, David, we are all appointed to Boston Avenue United Methodist Church right now. And so those appointments are the particular church, whereas in itinerancy is the overall system and structure.
So recently, both itinerancy and appointments have been much more in the spotlight in the United Methodist Church, with some high-profile instances of conflict around appointments. And there's some criticism of itinerancy that it's outdated, that it's not really a modern or relevant practice to our current church situation. Obviously, we're not in that circuit rider era where somebody would ride a horse from town to town. And we are, much more dense populations of people able to, do more. And arguably the role of church has changed. So there's a lot of criticism around itinerancy, but I wonder for you and your particular experiences, how is it relevant to your ministry? What are the strengths or the helpful pieces? What's the argument for it from your experience?
Well, for me, the itinerancy process has taken me to serve in congregations and churches that I wouldn't have otherwise known about or have even chosen a particular region or area to go to. That has been very fruitful for me and for the congregation in our ministry, because we were able to bring different perspectives to how to minister and serve in our communities. I think that it is helpful and useful in making sure that there are educated clergy who are available to serve in rural areas. That's one of the issues that I think that itinerancy handles that can be an issue in a church that does its own calling. So there are other denominations that do more of a system that's called a call system, where a church is responsible for finding their own clergy. And this also helps a church, instead of saying this is what we want, it helps a larger system look at each congregation and say, this is probably what this congregation needs. And sometimes what a congregation needs may be something that they don't even realize that they need. And of course, this isn't done to them, it's done with them and in consultation with them. but it helps broaden the perspectives over time. It helps broaden the perspectives of each congregation and each clergy person. And I would say it also helps each church to have a pastor with different strengths at different seasons in the life of the church. And same for pastors. Anytime I say, oh, I need to really grow in this or that area, I can be pretty assured that the next church I get is going to have a difficulty in that area, and we're going to have to learn it together, which is good for all of us.
Well, and I think the other gift that I have seen a lot around itinerancy is also that ability for there not to be a big gap or having a congregation without pastoral care for a long time. So I think there's a whole gift around being able to have the consistency for a congregation, but then also for the clergy person, knowing that as the incoming pastor, there's a pastor that was outgoing, and I can have that transition time with them as well. And that now, kind of as being the outgoing pastor, I get to have a great transition time with the incoming pastor and really able to help communicate a lot of things, around sort of areas so that things also don't get missed or things don't get dropped. And so I think there's a great gift in that consistency as well within itinerancy.
I also think that I'm not a minister, so I don't get to experience this. But I have been impressed as somebody who came from a different faith background at the connectional element of United Methodism. I think just generally because of the environment that we're in, there's sometimes competitiveness between churches. And I think when you have that shared pastorness, it creates greater connection. We're not going to try and stage a coup against the Methodist church down the street because our pastor might go there later on, right? I think it just creates that bond in a different way. And so like the church that you're moving to, Jen, was pastored by a former associate minister of Boston Avenue prior to this. And so I think that creates a great connection between the church you're going to and us. And I think it just reminds us that the faith is bigger than just our single church building, and that the denomination is bigger than just our single church building.
Agreed, Caitlin. That is one of the I've always been United Methodist, so I don't have an understanding of any other denomination from the roots of it. But that is definitely one of the reasons that I have stayed United Methodist, is because of the connectional nature. And not only we share resources, we share camps and things like that as well. And so that's another way that we're able to stay connected. Really, it honors that covenant of being in a covenant with clergy to care for the spiritual needs of an entire area, whatever that means.
You all are serving as guests on this topic because you will be leaving Boston Avenue at the end of June. Do you have any reflections or thoughts you'd like to share on this experience or process?
How long we got? No. I think that it's been a wonderful experience to serve at Boston Avenue. So I've been here for 5 years, and itinerated here from Coweta, United Methodist Church, a smaller, country kind of church right outside of Tulsa. And it has been such a great gift to be able to be with this faith community. But then has also been a great gift to know of all the things that I'm going to be able to carry with me to the next congregation. And like Jen said, the ways that, resources will also still be able to be shared. I know now a bunch of folks that I can call up and say, hey, I need to get a good resource for this kind of a curriculum. What kind of ideas you got? And so being able to have that ability of strength within community and within connection, and to be able to be at a place like Boston Avenue where it is a little bit, bit more open and progressive. And so things that I'm able to learn and to do here will also really be able to help me in my next congregational setting. And it's also, again, it's just always a gift to be able to leave something and to know that the people that are coming next, that they will bring in some different strengths that I don't have. and to be able to just continue to pray for them and to know that that ministry is going to grow because of the strengths that they are able to bring to that. And it truly is a huge relief in a lot of ways, kind of thinking about how you leave something. There's always grief, but I don't grieve. And I'm not worried about what is left behind, because I know that it's going to be in great hands, and that the people that are coming in are truly gifted for, such a time as this, as they say. So I love Itinerancy for that, and the whole process of being able to know that I don't have to worry about what is left behind, and that way I can also look towards what I'm going to, because I know that we are all moving in the directions that God is guiding us to be.
My first appointment change, I was expecting it because I knew I was going to be moved. My second appointment change, when I came to Boston Avenue, I did not realize that I was going to be moved. I hadn't asked for a move, and so it kind of came out of the blue. And that has really been a blessing, because it's not a move that I would have expected or thought to ask for, and yet it has been so rewarding. And again, kind of reinforces to me the purpose of Itinerancy, which is to say it's not us making the decisions on our own, but it's a whole system trying to look out for the good of the whole. And so my time at Boston Avenue, while unexpected, has been really formational for me, and being able to be mentored by Reverend David Wiggs and to kind of learn how a large church operates, because I've only been pastors of smaller churches, has been a blessing. And the connection to, especially in Oklahoma, a more progressive church, and some more progressive folks who will be able to help me sustain that when I move on into a lonelier setting, in a way, all of that. And I stay really connected in my heart to the people that I have served. You might not ever, I may not be outward about that, but I continue to pray for people. Even in churches that I've already left, I continue to pray for the pastors of those churches that I have left. And so every time I move, I just add to the collection of people that I feel connected to and loved by, and a part of something wonderful.
And I think, as your coworker, I grieve both of you leaving. And I know that we'll still be friends and still be in relationship, but it's hard. And yet, you both have been very humble and not mentioned that you're going to serve in a senior pastor role. But I think about the ministries that you're going into, the communities that you're going into, and just what a beautiful way to continue to serve. That you will be not only serving in a pastoral role, but in a leadership role, and in settings that are so beautifully aligned to the gifts that you have and that you're bringing, and to communities that those gifts will just enhance so strongly. And so that's a comfort, I think, to those of us who are staying behind, is to know that you are going where God is sending you.
Thank you so much for joining us today. This has been the Ascends of Boston Avenue podcast. Our producer is Alicia Urban. Our theme music was composed and performed by Wyatt Smith. Boston Avenue United Methodist Church is a progressive historic church located in downtown Tulsa, Oklahoma. Please visit our social media platforms for more information on what's going on at Boston Avenue UMC. We can be found on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. We'll talk to you next time. Thank you.